Okay, so are you ready to dive into some ancient history?
Always up for a good deep dive, especially when it comes to these genealogical records.
Right. They might seem like a lot of names and dates at first glance, but you know what they say? The past is never dead. It's not even past.
William Faulkner. Wise words indeed. And in this case, those names and dates, they hold the keys to understanding the world of ancient Israel.
Exactly. It's like we're cracking open a family album. But instead of faded photos, we've got these intricate family trees spelled out in the books of Chronicles, chapters 4 through 6.
And it's not just any family. We're talking about the descendants of Judah, Simeon, Reuben, and Levi. These are the tribes that shaped the destiny of a nation.
And their stories are anything but boring. We're talking about power struggles, love affairs, military conquest, and even a little bit of divine intervention.
It's a reminder that the past was just as messy and complicated as the present, and just as full of fascinating characters.
Okay, so let's start. Where else? At the beginning. We'll kick things off with Judah's descendants in First Chronicles chapter 4. Now, I know there are a lot of begats to get through.
It can feel like wading through a sea of names I know.
Right, but trust me, it's worth it. Because hidden amongst those so-and-so begat so-and-so are some real gems, like the story of Jabez. Have you always loved his name as much as I have?
Jabez. Well, it's certainly memorable, especially since it means pain in Hebrew. Talk about starting life with a hurdle.
Right. Not exactly a name you'd pick out for your firstborn, but that's what makes his story so interesting. Because despite that name, despite the fact that he's introduced with this almost like a label of hardship, he goes on to do some pretty incredible things.
He's definitely not defined by his name. In fact, he confronts it head on, and that's where his prayer in First Chronicles 4.0 Zion comes in.
Yes, that prayer, it's such a powerful moment. Here's this guy named Pain, and he's grilled enough to directly ask God for blessings.
And not just any blessings. He's asking for his territory to expand for protection from harm. He's practically negotiating his destiny with God.
And you know what's amazing? It seems like his prayer was answered. The text tells us that God brought about what he requested. Talk about faith being rewarded.
It really makes you wonder about the stories behind some of those other names, right? Like, who were these people? What were their hopes and dreams? What kind of mark did they leave on the world?
Right. We may never know the full stories of everyone listed. But Jabez reminds us that even within these ancient genealogies, we find individuals striving for something more. They yearned for a better future, negotiated with the divine, and ultimately left their mark on history.
Exactly. And speaking of leaving a mark, Jabez isn't the only one who adds this human element to these genealogies. Chapter 4 is full of these little details, like the story of Mered, who marries Bithiah, the daughter of Pharaoh himself.
Whoa, talk about a power couple. I mean, marrying into the Egyptian royal family, that's a big deal. It makes you wonder, was it a love match or a strategic alliance? Or maybe a little bit of both.
Right. It's a tantalizing detail, and it highlights something really important about this period. Intermarriage between different cultural groups, even at the highest levels of society.
So we're not just talking about keeping it in the family. These unions would have had ripple effects throughout both societies, socially, politically, even religiously.
Imagine the cultural exchange, the blending of customs and beliefs. It adds a whole other dimension to how we understand the dynamics of this period.
It reminds us that ancient societies weren't isolated. They were interconnected, and those connections played out in families, communities, and even on the international stage.
Exactly. And just like today, those connections weren't always peaceful, but they definitely made the world a more interesting place.
Okay, so we've got ambition, we've got international intrigue. What else could we ask for?
How about some good old-fashioned craftsmanship?
Oh, right. Oral Chronicles 4.14 mentions the skilled craftsmen of Judah metalworkers, weavers, potters. These weren't just hobbies. These were the backbone of their society.
Absolutely. These details offer us a glimpse into the economic and social structures of the time. Craftsmanship was highly valued right alongside lineage and military prowess.
It's like this reminder that even in ancient times, it took all kinds to build a society, from the kings and warriors to the artisans and craftspeople. It's a tapestry woven together by all these different threads, each one essential to the whole.
And it's that tapestry that we're going to keep exploring as we move into the story of Simeon and his descendant.
Oh man, Simeon. Now there's a story full of twists and turns. Get ready for expansion conflicts and a whole lot of drama. This displacement to the east would have significant consequences for Reuben's descendants, as we'll see when we explore their interactions with their neighbors.
Living on the periphery like that often forces you to become adept at navigating a complex web of alliances and rivalries.
Makes sense. When you're surrounded by other groups, you've got to know who to trust and who to watch out for.
Precisely. But before we get too deep into Reuben's story, let's backtrack a bit to Simeon, because his descendants, they weren't exactly known for their peaceful migrations.
Oh no, Simeon. He was a bit of a wild child, wasn't he?
To put it mildly, First Chronicles 4.3941 describes how they went searching for pasture land. And, well, let's just say they weren't afraid to step on a few toes to get what they wanted.
Yeah, they clashed with the Hamites, didn't they?
They did, and that's putting it lightly. The text says they utterly destroyed their enemies in their quest for those resources. It was a brutal conflict.
It really makes you think about the lengths people would go to for survival, especially in those times when resources were scarce and fiercely contested.
Absolutely. Water, grazing land. Those were essential for their way of life, and they were willing to fight tooth and nail to secure them, even if it meant resorting to violence.
It's a good reminder that history isn't always pretty, but it's important to remember the context. These weren't isolated incidents of aggression. They were part of a much larger pattern of territorial disputes and power struggles that defined the ancient world.
Exactly. We can't impose our modern sensibilities onto the past. Back then, tribal warfare and territorial conflicts were sadly a part of life.
So the Simeonites, they weren't messing around. They even took on the Amalekites, another group known for their fighting skills.
And emerged victorious, which really cemented their dominance in that region. But like so many stories in the Old Testament, their success was intertwined with conflict.
A classic case of, to the victor go the spoils. Or, in this case, a whole lot of livestock and treasure.
Indeed. But their story, like so many others, reminds us that even in victory, there's often a cost.
Speaking of costs, let's turn our attention to Reuben. He was Jacob's firstborn son, right? You'd think he'd be at the top of the world.
You'd think so. But Reuben's story, it's a classic example of how quickly fortunes can change.
What happened? Did he make a bad investment? Lose a bet with a cunning shepherd?
Not quite, though it certainly makes you wonder. No, First Chronicles 5.12 tells us that Reuben, despite being the eldest, lost his birthright because of a transgression against his father Jacob.
Wait, hold on. His birthright? That wasn't just about who got the extra piece of matzah at Passover, was it?
Not at all. In ancient Israel, the birthright was a huge deal. It came with significant privileges, a double portion of the inheritance, and often a leadership role within the family or tribe. Losing that status, it would have been a devastating blow for Reuben and his descendants.
Wow, talk about a fall from grace. So while Judah's line eventually led to King David and David, Reuben's descendants found themselves, well, not exactly ruling the kingdom, were they?
Not quite. They ended up pushed to the fringes, geographically speaking, east of the Jordan River. It wasn't the most desirable location, but it did shape their story in interesting ways.
I bet. Living out on the edges like that, they must have had some interesting encounters with their neighbors.
You could say that. They were constantly navigating this complex web of alliances and rivalries, trying to maintain their own identity and security in a region teeming with different groups.
It sounds like a precarious existence, to say the least. And speaking of precarious, they eventually found themselves face-to-face with a major power, the Assyrians.
But before their dramatic exit, they actually enjoyed a period of prosperity and military success, quite a contrast.
It really is remarkable how things can change so quickly, isn't it? One minute you're on top of the world, the next you're facing exile.
It's a tale as old as time, really. But you know what they say? Every ending is also a new beginning. And in this case, it allows us to shift our focus to a lineage with a decidedly different character. The Levites.
Yeah, the Levites. They always seem different from the other tribes, like they were playing a different game entirely.
That's a great way to put it, because for the Levites, their inheritance wasn't about land or political power. It was something much more profound, a sacred duty. They were the caretakers of Israel's spiritual life.
So instead of inheriting fields and flocks, they inherited the responsibility of connecting the people with the divine. That's a heavy burden to bear.
It certainly was. And First Chronicles 6 lays out the intricate lineage of this priesthood, with Aaron, the brother of Moses, as the first high priest.
Aaron, the original high priest. I'll talk about big sandals to fill. What exactly did being high priest entail back then?
Oh, it wasn't just an honorary title. They were responsible for carrying out the rituals, the sacrifices, essentially maintaining the sanctity of the tabernacle and later the temple.
So they were the bridge between the human and the divine, the ones responsible for maintaining that sacred connection.
Precisely. And it wasn't all just incense and sacrifices either. Remember those musicians we talked about earlier?
You mean the ones appointed to the house of the Lord?
Exactly. They weren't just background music. They played an essential role in creating an atmosphere of reverence and awe. Music was an integral part of worship.
It's amazing how music has always had this power to transport us, to connect us to something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. But even within this tribe dedicated to sacred service, there were different levels of responsibility, different roles to play.
Right, because not all Levites were priests, were they?
Exactly. First Chronicles 6.4953 makes a clear distinction between the descendants of Aaron, the priests, and the rest of the Levites. All Levites were consecrated, but the priests held a higher rank. Only they could perform the most sacred duties within the sanctuary.
So it was like a spiritual hierarchy, each level with its own unique responsibilities, all working together to maintain that vital connection with the divine. Speaking of roles, what about those cities of refuge? Those always fascinated me.
Ah, yes. The cities of refuge, mentioned in First Chronicles 6.5460, a fascinating glimpse into the nuances of ancient Israelite law. These cities were designated safe havens for individuals who had unintentionally committed manslaughter.
It's almost like an ancient witness protection program, but for accidental criminals.
In a way, it was a system designed to balance justice with mercy, offering refuge from blood vengeance and preventing endless cycles of retaliation.
So instead of being immediately punished, individuals could flee to these cities and plead their case.
Precisely. It acknowledged the complexities of human actions, recognizing that even unintentional acts had consequences, while also offering a path to redemption.
That's a remarkable system. But these cities of refuge, they weren't just randomly scattered, were they?
You're right. First Chronicles 6.6181 describes how specific cities were assigned to the Levites from the territories of different tribes. This ensured that these cities and the possibility of sanctuary and justice were accessible throughout the land.
So we've journeyed through generations, encountered stories of ambition and exile, witnessed the enduring influence of faith, and glimpsed the complexities of ancient Israelite society. From Judah's rise to prominence, Simeon's struggle for land, Reuben's tragic downfall, and Levi's dedication to spiritual service, these chapters offer a captivating look at a world long gone. It's like we've just finished reading an epic saga full of twists and turns.
It really is, and it underscores a key theme we've seen throughout: the importance of remaining faithful to one's heritage, not just in terms of lineage, but also in terms of belief. And it makes you realize that history isn't just about dates and battles, but about the choices people made, the beliefs they held dear, and the legacies, both triumphant and tragic, that they passed down through generations.
It makes you wonder what stories our own genealogies will tell, what future generations will make of the choices we're making today. But until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and most importantly, keep listening.
Welcome to Charlie and Mia's podcast. We're embarking on an exciting journey to read through the entire Bible in just 1 year. Every day, we dive into Scripture, exploring its meanings and how it applies to our lives today. We invite you to join us on this incredible adventure of learning and discovery. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode.